Hello, I would like to welcome everyone to the PartSource Executive Webinar Series. Today's presentation, Cost Savings and Gaining Efficiency Through Supply Chain Contract Management and Standardization, will be presented by Kayla Hepler, Clinical Engineering Contract Specialist from Intermountain Healthcare, and Erin Ridenauer, Director of Client Solutions Account Management from PartSource. One moment, please. I'm having a bit of trouble. Here we go. Before we begin, I would like to review a few housekeeping items. First, you'll have a control panel at the side or top of your screen. You can minimize and expand this panel. Second, you can submit questions using the question portion of the control panel. We will try to answer as many questions as we can at the end of this presentation. If your question is not answered, we will respond to you individually after this event. All registrants will receive a link to the recorded presentation after the webinar. This follow-up information will be sent to the email address with which you registered for this webinar. This message will be sent in 2 to 3 business days. Allow me now to introduce Erin Ridenauer to commence our presentation. Meet Erin Ridenauer, Director of Client Solutions and Account Management for PartSource. Erin manages our Client Solutions and Account Management team, which supports more than 60 health system program installations and encompasses more than 1,200 hospital locations. Erin graduated from Ashland University in Ohio with degrees in Business Administration and Business Management, with a focus in international business and marketing. Erin's work experience includes more than 20 years of serving client needs, and 4 of those years of service with PartSource. Welcome, Erin.
Good afternoon, everyone. At PartSource, quality is the foundation of our business. Standardization truly helps build and maintain that foundation, both in our solutions as well as how we serve our customers. The mainstay of PartSource Client Solutions and Account Management team is one of consistent support and service. Our team strives to help customize, configure, implement, maintain, and continually improve systems, processes, and procedures for and with our customers. Our commitment to our customers include proactive performance management to assist clients in regularly driving data optimization. We embrace our responsibility to provide the data, insight, and support needed to drive business impact. We are pleased that our customers, including Intermountain Healthcare, are similarly dedicated to standardization and in managing quality, costs, and overall efficiencies. Today, Kayla Hepler, Clinical Engineering Contract Specialist from Intermountain Healthcare, will highlight their cost savings and efficiencies gained and discuss the process and benefits of contract management standardization at her organization. Kayla Hepler serves as Contract Specialist for Intermountain Healthcare, a Utah-based not-for-profit system of 24 hospitals, a medical group with more than 2,400 physicians and advanced practice clinicians at 160 clinics. Ms. Hepler is currently responsible for assisting with all aspects of the contract management process for service agreements, covering medical equipment. Kayla oversees contract maintenance, life cycle management, record maintenance, and service strategy development for the Intermountain HTM Department. Prior to her role as contract specialist, Kayla served Intermountain as a financial analyst, providing analysis and reports related to the budgeting, strategic planning, variance, and operations data. Also ad hoc analysis process, which are used to ensure sound financial operations. Ms. Hepler received a Master's of Health Administration from Weber State University and also holds a Bachelor of Arts in Finance. Before we go ahead and get started, I would like to share this disclaimer. The slides in this presentation were prepared as talking points by the presenter. It is compiled from data, experiences, and processes at Intermountain Healthcare and are for information sharing purposes only. Kayla, the floor is all yours.
Don't know what happened there. Thanks for the introduction, Erin. Give me 1 second. There we go. All right, I'm excited to be with you here today, and I'm excited to share on some of the topics that we are covering today. I hope that some people will find it useful. Let's quickly review the agenda of the items we'll cover today. We will start by reviewing the objectives of today's webinar. I will cover some background information about my organization, Intermountain Healthcare. I will describe some of the issues we have experienced and are experiencing that lead us to change. I will discuss a couple of our standardization initiatives that I have been directly involved in. We will discuss what the role of a contract specialist entails. We will then wrap things up by discussing some successes that we have experienced and describe some of the plans we have for the future. And then we will end with some time for questions. So let's jump right in. Here are the objectives for this webinar today. We will discuss the reasons that led Intermountain to implement supply chain and contract management standardization. We'll learn specific actions that take in order to standardize contract management within a large multi-hospital health system. And finally, we will reveal some of our efficiencies gained, costs saved, and future plans for continued improvement. Let's review some quick facts about my organization. Intermountain Healthcare is an integrated delivery network based out of Salt Lake City, Utah. We are the second largest employer in Utah, second to the state itself. Intermountain's delivery network includes about 24 hospitals, with another one being built in Spanish Fork, Utah. The network includes a health plan, Select Health, which has almost 1 million members. There is a medical group that consists of 185 clinics now, plus 1,400 employed physicians and 4,000 affiliated physicians. Our continuum of care operations include telehealth, home care, life flight, a central lab, central pharmacy operations, and of course our clinical engineering services. The last thing under this network is Entalair, which is a group purchasing organization that Intermountain acquired. This map demonstrates our service area. The dots on the map correlate with each of our hospitals. As you can see, the majority of our facilities stretch through the center of Utah along the I-15 corridor, with the exception of one facility in Idaho. Our clinical engineering department supports over 100,000 pieces of equipment in these facilities with around 80 technicians. So before we dive into the contract management standardization piece, that is a large part of my role with clinical engineering, I want to frame some of the issues that we have experienced in the past that has been leading us to the changes we have made and are making. About 2 to 2.5 years ago, Intermountain went through a system-wide reorganization in order to address the rising costs in healthcare and to be nimble in the ever-changing healthcare environment. Our HTM department was no exception to this reorganization. During the evaluation for restructuring, our HTM department, some of the operational variations were identified. At the time, we were divided into regions, and these regions were operating within their own silos and had their own operational inefficiencies. I want to highlight a few of these variations that pertain to the topic I'm covering today. In some of these regions, clinical staff and department managers within the hospitals were managing their own service contracts and arranging for service if it was something that was outside of our internal HTM staff expertise. There were differing levels of expertise and training across the regions. Some of the regions were utilizing parts inventory and some were not. The way we were procuring parts differed across the regions, and the way that the data was managed varied by region. The diverse approaches in our HTM departments obviously can lead to added unnecessary expense or varied levels of quality, but there were strengths and weaknesses within each region. We tried to pull out the strengths and standardize them across the organization. Oops. We have now moved past this evaluation and restructuring phase. This is the list of some of our team members that make up our current structure. Our current HTM structure reports centrally through our system director, Mike Bustiker, in order to reduce and eliminate the work silos. We have our central support team that includes a service coordination center, an inventory coordinator, a cybersecurity team, a couple of data analysts, and then my role as contract specialist. Then we have our hospital operations that include 4 area CE directors and their local teams. And finally, we have our central depot repair services. With silos continuously being reduced and eliminated, our HTM department is now able to focus on changing some of the root issues that all HTM departments experience. How do you save the organization money while improving quality and increasing efficiencies? Intermountain created its supply chain center in 2006 to address this cost, quality, and efficiency problem for the entire organization. It is renowned for its procurement processes, and it does a great job of standardizing suppliers and creating efficiencies. Even with this ongoing standardization effort, Intermountain interacts with almost 8,000 suppliers on a regular basis. As a part of this extensive list of suppliers, our HTM department deals with approximately 8,700 unique manufacturer and model combinations, and as I previously mentioned, over 100,000 pieces of equipment. When you're dealing with that many suppliers and types of equipment, it is understandably difficult to standardize the processes and quality outcomes when it comes to equipment repairs. I want to refer back to a statement that Dustin Smith, our former Director of Central Support, made that really highlights them well. Like most healthcare systems, our clinical engineering department was spending hours on the phone with manufacturers, figuring out which parts were needed, determining whether to repair or replace, and deciding whether to go with that vendor or to repeat that process yet again with another vendor. Even with the supply chain's significant efforts to standardize suppliers and equipment, there was not a solution for clinical engineering on this specific problem for procuring parts and standardizing service agreements. I just described quite a few issues to you all that I'm sure are not entirely unfamiliar. Centralizing our structure has helped reduce silos so that we can work as a system to solve those issues and inefficiencies. There are still issues that could not be solved with restructuring alone. Over the last couple of years since restructuring, we have been making significant efforts to standardize our processes in order to gain those efficiencies and save the organization money. I want to describe 2 of our initiatives that I was specifically involved in. The first one is our standardization of parts procurement, and the second is my role as contract specialist and its impacts on service agreement standardization. Our HTM department leadership wanted a solution for parts procurement that would get engineers off of the phone and computer and back in front of the medical devices, turning the wrenches. We also needed to ensure that engineers are maintaining the same level of quality on the parts utilized throughout our system. We ended up selecting the PartSource Pro platform as the solution to our parts procurement and parts standardization issues. The selection process involves meeting with the PartSource team in order to understand the benefits, comparing purchasing data to understand the savings opportunity, and then conducting a trial run at a few of our select sites. The benefits outside of the hard dollar savings became apparent quickly, and we expanded the subscription to all of our sites not long after beginning the trial. PartSource Pro transformed the typical individual engineering processes or purchases from a broad selection of vendors into a centralized and standardized process that is quicker, easier, and leverage buying power for volume pricing. As a result, engineers can focus on their core responsibility of ensuring that equipment is taken care of and available whenever needed for patient care. To quote Dustin Smith again, no longer is selecting a vendor a matter of memory or emotions when it comes to decision making. It is now based on objective, vendor-specific performance and quality metrics presented by the platform's built-in quality management engine. Also, vendors' reliability metrics are tracked by PartSource Pro, which means that we can trust the platform's evidence-based decision support to identify the best vendors for optimal quality, performance, and pricing for our needs. The PartSource Pro platform really does a great job in solving our problems with the parts procurement processes in our organization, but this is only one piece of the puzzle when it comes to the various standardization initiatives we are working on. Next, I want to describe another one of our standardization initiatives, which is very much a part of my role with Intermountain. Let's discuss our efforts to address the problem I described previously, in which department managers or asset owners are managing their own service contracts. Contract management standardization starts with Intermountain Supply Chain Center. Supply chain has 4 main operational areas, and I want to refer to one area specifically, which is their category management department. The category management department is responsible for supplier relationship management, sourcing, contracting, and developing strategy for standardization. The supply chain's role is to source and execute contracts that the various stakeholders need and request based on their business operations. They have made significant efforts in standardizing templates and processes for contracting. Because of the previous siloed structure within HTM, service contracts were managed by the departments that owned and utilized the equipment. There were a few scenarios that would trigger the contracting process for service on equipment. If an expensive repair had to be done by the original equipment manufacturer, then the department would likely request the supply chain to execute a service agreement so that repair costs wouldn't be a big surprise in their budget next time. If the department already had a service agreement and they received a renewal request, the supply chain would be asked to extend it. No evaluation was typically done to determine if the contract brought value to the organization. Or lastly, a department would request a service agreement, unaware of the fact that our HTM department was capable of servicing that particular equipment. In addition to this, different facilities had different service levels. Some sites would simply pay for the PM annually and pay for the repairs as they came up, because they were typically few and far between and they were cheaper than the service agreement. Or on the flip side, some sites would err on the side of caution and pay for the service agreement. This option typically costs more, but it also prevents unexpected spikes in their department budgets. In summation, the process for creating, executing, and renewing contracts is standardized through the supply chain. But the process for developing a system strategy on how service contracts are utilized and then managed needed work. When the HTM department completed its evaluation back in 2018, this process gap was identified and the contract specialist role for clinical engineering was created. So what does the role of a clinical engineering contract specialist entail? When I was brought to the team in 2018, I had to start from the ground up, for the most part. It took some time for me to get my bearings and identify the existing processes and areas to focus on first. One of the first things I had to do was to get my process established with the supply chain. These service agreements start and end with the supply chain. After I became familiar with our HTM department's needs and strategies, I set to work. Within the first year, I was able to establish a high-functioning relationship with the supply chain. My role is to develop the strategy behind the service of our enterprise's medical equipment. Should we service it in-house? Should we acquire a service agreement? Or should we have the OEM service it on a time and materials basis? The supply chain's role is more tactical and mechanical. They negotiate with the supplier, execute the contracts, and maintain the relationships with the suppliers. I want to add here that I am only referring to their role when it comes to the service contracts. The supply chain is obviously very strategic when it comes to standardizing products and suppliers. Because the vast majority of contract requests flow through the supply chain, I rely on them to be my funnel. We identified key scenarios when category management should engage me in their process, and I identified key questions so that they could gather the right information for our department to make an informed decision. I've got my main questions displayed here. Some of these questions may seem pretty simple and obvious, but for the supply chain, service is not always a primary focus, so it's new territory. The information gathered can help me identify the best solution that makes sense for that particular piece of equipment. I often consult with engineers that work at the facilities to get their insight as well. Finding out where else the same equipment exists also allows us to execute the same approach for all 24 facilities, or however many have that equipment, at the same time on a coterminous agreement. This also gives us the opportunity to leverage better pricing with our economies of scale. Now the process looks something like this. If a department manager experiences one of the scenarios I explained previously, up those top 3 boxes, then they put in a request with the supply chain and the supply engages with me in the appropriate scenarios. The end result of the information and research we gather is one of two things. Either we execute a contract as requested, but potentially it is added to an existing agreement, or other equipment across the enterprise is brought into this new agreement. Or two, we determine that a contract is not necessary, and we educate the clinicians as needed. Because we just standardized this contract evaluation process recently, clinical engineering does not yet own all service agreements from a financial perspective. We are acting as a consultant, and I think this works well as we build trust throughout the organization. Slowly, we have been bringing in some of the larger service agreements into our financial budget. In 2018, when I started, we had about 13 contracts that we managed centrally. We have about double that now. The reason we have not grown that faster is because some of the background work that it entails to do this. So some of my other responsibilities that I have in managing our contract processes include invoice audits and supplier accountability. For the agreements that our HTM department manages financially, we issue a PO from our department and we audit every single invoice that they send. We ensure that we are only paying for what we should be according to the contract. Additionally, we are ensuring that equipment that gets disposed of gets removed from the agreement in a timely manner, or any new equipment that gets installed gets added to the agreement post the warranty expiration. Next is contract database management. When I came onto the team, they were utilizing a homegrown equipment maintenance module to track service agreements, and this application was separate from our PeopleSoft application. PeopleSoft is the application we use for procurement, financial processes, equipment inventory, and maintenance management, among many other things. The actual equipment and maintenance data was moved to PeopleSoft years ago, but the contracts were still tracked in this homegrown application. This proved to be problematic and cumbersome. Just last month, we finished standing up a service contract module within PeopleSoft that ties to actual asset data, so its status is constantly updated. Part of my role is to keep this database up to date with the new contract information, and currently this is just for the agreements that we financially manage in our HTM department. Next is the contract allocations to the facilities. Our HTM department is a zero-cost department, so we allocate our costs back to the facilities based on the ownership of the equipment. This is a process I complete with finance on a monthly basis. And lastly is equipment database improvement. Because I'm touching a lot of the different types of equipment, and because of the process I stood up with supply chain, I gained visibility to assets that were never added to our equipment inventory for some reason or another. I share this information with local engineers in an effort to be continuously improving our database. In total, there's a lot of data management responsibility that comes with these contract standardization efforts. I, with a great amount of help from our various individuals on our team, am able to accomplish these tasks associated with the strategy development and data management pieces of my role. So let's quickly review some of these successes we have experienced. Specifically with the contract management processes, we've had a few successes. We've been able to integrate our contract database into our existing CMMS, PeopleSoft. We've been able to standardize the service contract evaluation process with the supply chain. And we have centralized the decision-making process, which helps take that burden off the engineers directly. Overall successes that we have experienced include that we have saved almost $300,000 in hard dollar savings with the increased collaboration between myself, the supply chain, and the clinical engineers at the facilities. This doesn't include the savings realized from the PartSource platform. In the first 7 months alone, the PartSource platform saved us $200,000 in hard dollar savings. The hard dollar savings from the PartSource does not even begin to capture the soft dollar savings we gain from efficiencies our engineers are realizing with the platform. And finally, we have realized around $500,000 in cost avoidance, and this includes things like obtaining training on a new device so that we do not have to obtain a service agreement. So in total, we added about $1 million worth of value to our organization in 2019. Let's wrap things up by highlighting a few of our plans for the future. For the contract management standardization efforts, here are some of our plans for the future. We want to further standardize some of our contract language when it comes to service levels. Currently, we have contract language for full service, but I think there's a lot of gray area between the full service agreement and a fully in-house agreement that contains only training terms. I want to capture some of the gray area in our contract templates. We want to get suppliers to adhere to certain processes when it comes to how they invoice us. This may be included in some of the contract terms we update. Clean invoices make the invoice auditing process significantly easier. And lastly, now that we have our contract database integrated into our CMMS, we are working on a way to link that service contract database directly into our engineers' work orders to give them asset level contract visibility. From a higher level, some of our plans for the future include leveraging part source data and analytics to better understand the parts we are using and how we can further standardize them across the organization. For example, are there areas that we could limit to a specific third-party part only because it saves money and is good quality? Some of the parts usage data in the part source platform can also help us identify more parts that could be beneficial to supply through our central parts depot in order to further mitigate equipment downtime. So that is all I have for you today. Let's move on and see if I can answer some of your questions.
Thank you, Kayla. At this time, again, I'd like to point all the attendees to look at your control panel. Within the control panel, you'll see a questions area that you can utilize to submit your questions. Again, it's a Q&A. It's got a Q on the icon. We'll take the time to answer as many questions as possible today. We'll give you guys a few minutes to get your questions in the queue here. Let me take a look. The first question I see, this one will be directed to you, Kayla. You mentioned a supply chain center. About how long did it take to centralize? So I guess your project you're putting together.
Yeah. So our supply chain's been around since 2006. So they've had these various contract processes in place for some time. And then I would say, like I said, I started in 2018. So some of these more service contract specific improvements have been happening since I started. Does that kind of answer that?
I think so. If you have further questions, whoever asked that question, if you have further question with regard to that, just please send it in. There's another one that says, how long did you trial or about how many test sites before going live? I'm not sure if that's clear, but.
No, I think I get what they're saying. I think they're talking about with the PartSource Pro platform. So we started out, gosh, my memory fades with time, but we started out with maybe 2 or 3 select sites. And we did that for a month or 2. And like I said, we quickly realized, no, this is going to be great. And so we expanded to the other sites, probably within 5 months of first starting the trial.
Great, thank you. We've got a bunch of questions rolling in now. We'll try to get to many of these as we can. They said, have you been able to integrate the PartSource platform with PeopleSoft? I know you mentioned PeopleSoft, so I guess the question is, do they work together?
Yeah, so we have a punch out in PeopleSoft. So the engineers, when they need to order a part, they actually go to PeopleSoft first, and then they go through this punch out. And it's essentially the same. It's just kind of changing where they start, and then they order their parts like they would normally, and then and you have to bear with me because this is not my strong suit. I don't do CMMS as much. But basically, once they complete their order, it puts it back into PeopleSoft, and a PO is created and sent to PartSource to complete the order.
Thank you. One person says, who has final decision on service contract and service levels, ... HTM or clinical operations?
That's a great question. I think it's a mix. Like I said, we're currently kind of acting as a consultant. So we kind of advise, like one example comes to mind where I was meeting with the neurology clinical program about some specific equipment. And I gathered all that information, kind of those questions that I had highlighted, and I basically laid it out to them, like, you guys, this is your actual repair history. You don't have that many repairs. This is what the service contract costs. This is what you would have paid in repairs. Kind of that comparison, and we act as a consultant. And obviously, I'm not a clinical engineer by background, so I have to rely pretty heavily on the engineers themselves to help me with this information. So we kind of advise what we think, but ultimately there's been a few scenarios where they're like, nope, we want the service contract. And we're like, okay, that's your decision. I think as we build more trust though, I think that will change. I think if we say, no, it doesn't make sense to have a service contract here, I think people will take our word for it as we continue to build that trust throughout the organization.
Another one came in, I think, relaying to that question just now. How often are your service levels reviewed? It says with your customers, but I'm guessing that means with your different suppliers maybe, or with your internal, maybe your category team. Just says how often are your service levels reviewed?
I would say since we're still relatively young in this process, unfortunately, I'm not doing as much proactive reviewing as I'd like to be. It's more reactive. So if a service contract comes to the supply chain because it's being renewed right now, that's the time when we kind of do our evaluation. As we kind of move forward though, I think it's a great idea to be continuously reviewing that service level with our different clinical operational areas to just determine, okay, we've had this service contract for the last year. Does this still make sense at this point in time? So we're not there yet, but I think it's definitely an area I'd like to head.
There's another one that says, when you talked about the saving, I'm paraphrasing a little bit because it's kind of long, talking about the savings, was it over a period of a year, or do you know the time period was it since you started with the system?
Yeah, so I only pulled out 2019 savings numbers. We had additional savings before that, but I didn't even look at the numbers. So yeah, that's purely 2018 that I'm referring to.
Okay. Another one I'm going to paraphrase a little here. It talks about the time savings, or soft savings. Were positions eliminated, or was this from time not spent on phone shopping for parts?
No, we did not eliminate any positions. That was not the intention at all. I think with the soft savings or the time savings that we were experiencing, it just gives our engineers more time to be, I don't know, we were spread pretty thin, it felt like before. And so now they just have more time to actually be working on equipment. So we didn't eliminate any positions.
I think you answered this one in your presentation, but somebody's questioning about it again. How many contracts are managed by HTM team? So I guess that's you.
Yes.
And what are the goals of additional numbers of contracts do you expect to bring to your team?
So currently, between lab and kind of what I call general biomed, we have about 26 contracts that we manage centrally. As I kind of mentioned before, like as things come up, we evaluate like what makes sense, and we kind of bring in some of those as we go. I'm trying to focus more on standardizing the processes when it comes to like the invoice auditing and all that data management stuff that I was referring to. Trying to focus on that first, and then I think more and more we'll bring in more of the contracts centrally. I know lab is a really big area that we've got our foot in the door, and we're managing a couple. I think out of those 26 contracts, I think maybe 10 of them are lab. So we're focusing. Lab has a lot of service contracts when you look at the entire organization. So we're trying to focus on them as our next modality to kind of bring in. So I think I answered that.
A question, someone says, can you share your top 2 to 3 performance metrics for the HTM program? So I'm not certain if you're talking about your team, like what are the top 2 to 3 things you all measure, or your role specifically. It's not very clear in this question here, but I guess maybe just highlight some of the performance metrics that you guys check in on regularly, and hopefully that'll answer their question.
Yeah, let me think here. I mean, from the contract perspective specifically, I mean, really we're just focused on the savings number and then the number of contracts we manage centrally. But then from an overall, you know, from an HTM perspective, I know we're tracking, like one of our big ones we're tracking this year is kind of from a cybersecurity standpoint, where those could not locate, you know, on equipment that couldn't be located for whatever reason to do the PM. We actually are tracking those on a different, from a different point of view, and we're sharing that with hospital administrators, and it's amazing how much that's helped equipment show up out of the woodwork. So I know it's a big one. Previously, we were focused on equipment downtime. I mean, I think that kind of highlights a few of them. I'm happy to kind of, I think one thing that maybe people would find valuable is, and I know Mike has presented on it before, but maybe sharing our Huddle Board and what's currently on it. And for those who have not heard Mike present before, Huddle Board is an Intermountain thing. We meet 2 to 3 times a week and review key metrics to see how we're doing on a regular basis. So I can maybe offline share that information to anybody who's interested, just to see what we're tracking currently. I'm working from home, okay, so I don't have it in front of me.
Okay. Yeah, I do remember in an old presentation, we had a picture of one of your all's boards that might be helpful to give somebody an idea. I can share that with the person that asked that question as well. So 2 more. One was, what were the questions you asked? I'm sorry, you have supply chain ask for you. I think there were. Can we actually maybe
go back on the slides, maybe? Oops, I didn't mean to do that. So these were just questions that, as I kind of developed the process, I was like, well, in order to make an informed decision, I need this information. And sorry, for some reason I can't see the. Can you share the screen or make it bigger? Oh, shoot.
Did I do it?
It's like blocked for some reason, so I can't even see the bottom part. You might have to do it for me.
I'm trying to get back to that one. There, I think that's it.
Yeah, great. So these are like the five key questions that I have supply chain try to gather before we even like get to a decision making point. So it's like getting the list of all the equipment located at our facilities. I mean, things get missed sometimes for whatever reason. It never got added into our database. So this is super helpful in seeing where those gaps are and then getting that equipment added. I share that with the engineers. Do they offer biomed training? Sometimes they're not going to offer it outright. You know, it doesn't hurt to ask and see if they're even open to it. So I always have supply chain ask that. The user manual goes along with that too. Typically, I don't want to share that, but we ask anyways. So, and then will they sell us parts? Kind of along the same thing. And then can they provide us a parts list? I think part of that is solved with the PartSource Pro platform, but it is kind of frustrating to me that when we do like product agreements with suppliers, yeah, sure, they'll commit to a certain price per product, but when it comes to a parts list, for some reason, that's totally off limits. And that frustrates me. So we always ask for that too, but I mean, like I said, with the PartSource Pro platform, usually parts isn't an area that I focus on when I'm doing this kind of thing. So hopefully that answers that question.
Yes, hopefully so. Thank you. And then I've got one more, and then I don't have any. I only have one left in the queue here. Are your pieces of equipment in PeopleSoft asset management database? That makes sense.
Yes.
I'm not familiar with PeopleSoft, so I don't know.
Yeah, all of our equipment are tracked in PeopleSoft. We have an asset tag for every piece of equipment, and it's linked to the PO that it was purchased on even. So.
Okay. Well, we don't have any additional questions in the queue. So again, if there's any last questions anybody would like to pop into the window, we have another minute or two. Otherwise, I would like to thank Kayla and Erin and all of you who joined the webinar today for your time. You see on the screen, we are having a webinar next week focused on how PartSource is assisting HTM teams with addressing COVID-19. It's going to be presented by our Senior VP Dave Brennan, and Mara Pare, the VP of Client Solutions. Your reply email that you'll be getting with the recording link will have a link to register for that session if you have interest or if you'd like to forward it on to any of your teammates to join the session. So again, thank you, Kayla and Erin, for joining today. As a reminder, everyone will receive a follow-up email that will include the presentation recording, as well as a link to register for the next recording. It will go to the email with which you registered for today. At this time, our webcast is ended. Thank you all for attending and have a wonderful day.